Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the Paris Advanced Research Center online event. Water as the new oil, the rising value and geopolitics of global water resources. I am Nevzat Çelik, the director of the Paris Advanced Research Center, and I am delighted to welcome you all. We are privileged to have Professor Emeritus Mukesh Kapila, an esteemed expert in global health, humanitarian affairs from the University of Manchester. He's here to help us navigate the complex landscape of global water resource and geopolitics. Prof. Kapila, welcome and thank you for being with us today. To start our conversation, I would like to ask a simple question that will help us better understand the topic today. In your view, why is water often referred to as the new oil in the context of global geopolitics and resource management?
Well, we are familiar with oil as a geopolitical instrument because it powers the development of nations. It powers competition between nations, and it is instrumental in the way society has organized and advanced and competed and fought with each other in the decades that have passed. Well, the scarcity of water and its increasing critical role in human well-being, as well as in our different industrial and agricultural processes, makes it a geostrategic instrument in the same way as oil. So many have therefore likened it to the new oil.
Yeah, we understand the oil has been the major resource of conflict, and I would like to know, can you discuss the potential impact of water shortage and insufficient resource on international relations, particularly in a region where shared water resources are a source of tension? And I was delighted to read your article on TRT, is water becoming the new oil. It's a very amazing article on all the aspects of how the water became a new the subject of the conflict. You mentioned the potential for water-related conflicts due to scarcity and transboundary issues. In your opinion, how can international laws and cooperation help prevent such conflicts?
Well, water is increasingly under stress for climatological reasons, environmental change reasons, and simply the way we waste it and extra demands we place on it in our different industrial processes and agricultural processes. So as a scarce commodity, it is by definition, therefore, a subject of competition. As far as international law is concerned, there are laws in existence which govern the division of water, especially when rivers cross boundaries, and formulae are allocated in terms of fair sharing of water resources between neighboring countries. So, for example, Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt is one example, India, Pakistan, or India, Bangladesh is another example, and there are many others. Now, those laws are about ensuring that everyone has enough for their needs for normal human development and practical development. And at the same time, nobody monopolizes that water and diverts it, which would reduce the enjoyment of that water for downstream countries. But unfortunately, these are matters of judgment rather than anything else. And water is also a very unpredictable resource. We don't know which year we're going to have floods, though increasingly these are frequent, or droughts, and the demands and supplies do not necessarily follow a fixed formula. or a predictable formula. So all that creates tensions and unpredictability between nations. And when there is unpredictability, that's where geopolitics comes into it. And the law is not necessarily the right way to go in terms of dealing with these problems, because they're fundamentally about negotiation, fundamentally about neighborly relations, and how to actually coexist better on our shared planet.
Well, thank you. But we're always thinking about, the river passes from the countries and the geography, as I grew up in Turkey, we have Euphrates and Tigris, as you mentioned in your article also. Before, it has been a problem between Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. And as you mentioned also, it's in between Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt, and also in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, also maybe in other regions. Is there international law about it? I mean, as you mentioned, sometimes we have a rainy season, and sometimes we have a tough and rough season that we are scarce of water. Do we have international law about it, or is just between the countries?
The international law is not very strong on this particular issue, and it's between countries ultimately to resolve these sharing issues, because water is a common good, is a common public good, and in that sense, it's a bit like the air we breathe. There isn't a law about reducing pollution in the same way. So a country can pollute as much as it likes and the whole world has to pay. So similarly, I think these resources are very difficult to regulate just on the basis of international law. And I think diplomacy and good relations have more to say down it. If you were to go down the legal route, then I think there'll be more problems, because people say, well, this is my side, that country is bigger than this country, surely its share should be greater. And how are you going to then decide what the needs are of different countries? Because there are different levels of requirements, they've got different natural resource bases, and so on and so forth. So the law is not a good way to resolve these kinds of issues.
Yeah, well, as you know, the most of the early civilization has been settled near the rivers, and especially in Mesopotamia or in Hindu Kush in India or other regions. And now we have, I am not expert of this, but when I see the many dam has been building in many area, and in the same way, the dam doesn't protect, we have source enough for the population, or we don't let the flow the other countries. I mean, how we manage about it?
Well, dams have had a checkered history in that they have been absolutely vital for development in poor nations or in any nation, for example. Bringing electricity, bringing water on a predictable basis, controlling flooding, and then, of course, resources for irrigation. So there have been, and even before modern dams came along, human beings dammed water. They stored water, and then they released that water for when needed at the different seasons. The problem has been that dams have become bigger and bigger as the decades have passed. So today, now we have serious environmental issues around dams. They include, for example, minor earthquakes that have even been reported. We know that dams' lifetime, the life of a dam is not as much as we think, because the dams easily silt up, especially when river flows are low. Then that means that dams are quickly filling up with silt, and therefore lifespans of dams is not that great in some places where the first generation of dams that have been built. And then, of course, many people and villages and cultures have been lost historically when their land was flooded, very often with little consideration to people's basic rights. And they were just thrown off the land and forced to urbanize and given very little compensation in the sake of the greater good, which the dams are supposed to bring. So dams are going out of fashion to some extent, but we've still got an endowment of, thousands of dams around the world. And when those dams mean water supplies being disrupted to neighboring countries, which is what the issue is around the Great Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. The dam is very much needed to bring development to Ethiopia and to regulate the flow of the water. But obviously, the riparian countries downstream, they are very worried about that. So I think we are moving more towards not macro solutions, but to micro solutions for these environmentally sensitive resource management issues, like the management of water. So gone are the days, I think, that massive dams are going to bring massive benefits for a large number of people. Today, we realize that small-scale solutions at the community level are more sustainable, and their benefits are more diverse and more manageable than the mega dams we've had in the past.
Thank you. Well, I have learned something new about the dams. Thank you for this. And let me also go to about the hot topic last years about climate change and relation with the water scarcity. And how do you think the climate change is exacerbating water resource management issue? And what steps can government take to make less effect of the scarcity of water? And as I read from your articles, it seems in the future we will have more problem of water resources, particularly in Africa. And how is related with what we have in our hand and what is going with climate change about the water that we consume?
Well, I think what most people don't recognize, is that water is a finite resource. So whatever water we had at the beginning of creation is the water we have now. You can't make new water.
Interesting.
So if we lock up that water, then that water, for example, in concrete, or it is lost in the sea with the glacier melt, which means more fresh water is then going into the sea and becoming saline, then that water is lost. Having said that, actually, we only need about 1% of the Earth's water resources to live and do quite well. So we've got plenty of water, but either it's in the wrong places at the wrong time, or we are wasting it without regard for the future. And climate change, I think, is a very powerful wake-up call, because the effect of climate change is that as the world gets hotter, the water will evaporate more. Also, the droughts and dry areas will increase. Even as the wet areas get wetter, the dry areas will get wetter. So, that's why a better phrase for climate change is actually climate variability, because it affects different parts of the world in different ways. And in all scenarios, the water is going to become a scarce resource, especially clean water, drinking water. Therefore, the policy response to that is an obvious one. Firstly, waste less, and that means conservation. in different forms, both in terms of more efficient use of water in production. So in growing crops, for example, or in industrial processes which consume thousands of liters of water, I'm sure we can do much better in terms of using less water for having the same output. And that's already a lot of innovation is happening in that regard, and that's a very hopeful sign. And the second important aspect of water in the era of climate change is that we need to think more carefully about pricing it, so that we have a scarce resource is going to get more expensive. That's a law of the market, right?
That's true.
But on the other hand, water is a public good. We can't raise the price of water so much that people are dying of thirst, and this would be inhumane. In the same way, we have a right to breathe air, which is clean. We have a right to drink water, which is safe. So the economic aspects of water supply and availability, so that everyone gets according to their requirement without becoming water insecure, is a major challenge. And economists haven't yet figured out what the best model is for that. But it certainly doesn't mean more and more heavy water infrastructure. I was only reading yesterday in the paper here that Spain is in a drought already, and we are still in April, and apparently it is recording 40 plus degrees temperatures and drought conditions and so on. At the same time, a third of the water in Spain, and just a random example, it's equally bad or worse in other countries, is lost in its pipe work.
It's very interesting what you mentioned about. It also is a drought year of the France. Also, I think it's last 40 years also for France. But I was also seeing your article, why the Spain as a European country, why cannot manage this issue in Spain?
Exactly. So I think this is a problem before modern states, whether they're European or non-European. We are reliant on a mindset which is about long infrastructure, right? So, we dig holes in the ground, we plant massive pipes, and then we transport that water hundreds and thousands of kilometers and to get it into people's homes. So, and that's the way we've grown up. It's the same way with electricity. We have electricity grids and networks. And both in the case of electricity and in the case of water, there's a great deal of transmission loss along the way. So more and more thinking is moving towards small-scale area solutions. In the same way that solar power and other renewable energy sources are talking about local energy production for families, for communities, for households even. Similarly, probably we will have to go in for water harvesting and less localized solutions to water in people's homes and communities, rather than massive engineering approaches, which are environmentally much more tougher and less resilient with all the changes that are taking place. But what that means in turn is, I think, in individuals, and here in France, the communes and so on have to take more responsibility for meeting the basic needs in this area in their own neighborhoods, rather than relying on a national approach to it. So local is better, and in fact, it's going to be inevitable that we go down that particular route.
Very interesting, and also it was interesting to see to make pure of gin, it takes around 10,000 liters of water. And I would like to ask you, how can government or civil society encourage responsible water use and conservation among the citizen industries and agriculture sectors? Because, as let's say the new generation, we have a lot of gene and a lot of clothes, and we take everyday shower. And it will come from courage of individual responsibility, or it has to take with kind of law that push the citizen to follow, or industries or agriculture.
Well, I think governments certainly have a responsibility to make policies. We saw an example of that, of course, with the energy policy after the Ukraine-Russia war that has required intervention.
That's true.
In the energy market at different levels. Similarly, I think government has a role in terms of, firstly, putting into effect policies which penalize inefficient use of water and incentivize both innovation in water use, as well as rewarding more economical use of water. And if the government sends those signals through the policy frameworks and, of course, financial signals, then both the manufacturers in the market and individuals will respond. And that's what we've seen with other policy intervention areas. I think it's like nudging a ship in the right direction, slowly. And most people will, I think, start taking this seriously when the water crisis hits them personally. As long as it remains remote, it's a kind of an abstract or academic issue. But increasingly, it's becoming a personal issue. And so this is what governments can do. Now, I'm against more coercive approaches. For example, you could take a draconian approaches. You could, for example, ration water. You could, and sometimes that is necessary in extreme conditions, as we know. Or you could have more coercive attitudes in terms of taxation or heavy taxation, but that would have the impact of hurting the poor. Remember, we need water for our health and hygiene, which are extremely fundamental considerations. It's not so much how many showers we have, but whether or not we have enough safe drinking water and enough for our personal well-being and cooking and cleanliness and such like. And don't forget the sanitation link to water. I mean, we are talking about water, but of course, water and sanitation go together. And sanitation management consumes a lot of water. And but again, innovation is making it more efficient. So I don't see a magic bullet answer in all of this. It'll require a kind of social response, certainly a political response, certainly an economic response, and then, of course, nature will send its signals, which will have to be heeded, whether we like it or not.
So I think it will be like more like a campaign as we are aware about climate change, and I think it's pretty much related with water sources also. And we have to think, as you mentioned, is as an essential part of life. We cannot live without water. It has to go together. It's the without water there is no life. That's true, and it's also more a self-responsibility to awareness, I guess.
Yes, and absolutely. And we, of course, are living in Europe and speaking from Europe. So, in a somewhat luxurious position, even when we are inconvenienced with extremely hot weather, like France or other European countries are increasingly nowadays. Just spare a thought. For example, in the last day or two, you've been reading the stories about all the Sudanese refugees leaving and accumulating at the border with Egypt. and trying to cross the border and running out of water, running out of the basics in a way. So we're going to have, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of refugees coming out of Sudan. And that's, I mentioned only because it's current news. But the same thing with the Rohingyas, the same thing with the many, many other displaced and forced migrant populations, particularly in Africa, and those affected by conflict as well as disasters. So for them, they struggle to get enough water, even for the absolute minimum needs, is a very expensive business. You have to walk miles and miles to collect your water, which consumes an awful lot of energy. And then you're not sure of it. So that, I think, there are two levels of this conversation, really. One is that, yes, our lifestyles, especially those who are reasonably better off, will have to adjust. We will be affected, and life is not going to be so comfortable. And it may be that our swimming pools will no longer be, so easily fillable, and so on and so forth, or we'll have to pay extra, to go for a swim in the public swimming pools. So there is that level of concern. And then there is the much more existentialist level of concern, which affects the poorest people on the planet, who, for them, it literally is a matter of dying from thirst or dying from diseases that are linked to inadequate quality or quantity of water. And those numbers we're talking about they're not small numbers. We may well be talking of in the region of maybe 300, 400, 500 million people who are seriously water insecure. And in the same way that they search for a little bit of income every day to survive, they are searching for a little bit of water to drink every day. And as we get more urbanized, and this is happening all over the world, especially in the poorer countries, where urbanization is going extremely fast, because rural-urban migration is taking place because of economic and environmental pressures in rural areas. The urban areas, the challenges are even greater, because you're living in high-rise buildings, you're more concentrated, and you'd have thought the infrastructure might be better in terms of being able to have access water. Maybe, maybe not. So it's not unusual nowadays in most major cities in the developing world to actually have your pipes cut off. You only get water 1 or 2 hours a day. So, I remember as a child growing up in India, and water was unlimited. Living in a moderate-sized city in North India, no big deal. You have showers as long as you like, and plenty of water to drink, and do whatever you want to. Today, in my grandfather's house, the same house that I grew up as a child, they will get maybe 4 hours of water a day. And so what people do is they have storage tanks built into their homes and store up the water and do the best they can, but even those can run dry. And that's within, one lifetime, if you like. And this is going to be a norm for many, many people in times to come.
It's very interesting, Professor. It's really more I hear from you, and more I aware how is important, the water for everybody, especially, we are living in a world without borders, when we see it from the satellite, but we are clearly living in a world unfair. And as you mentioned, we are living part of Europe, and we never think about the shortage of the water. And but at the same time, we are sure there is 1 million people working every day to just drink a water. And still, I'm in 2023. And I would like to ask you one more question. And how do you see the role of technology and innovation in addressing this global water crisis and all the problems you mentioned? And I remember I read an article a long time ago that was mentioning about to taking water from ocean as a drinkable water. Is it true? Or are we coming to this kind of innovation and technology?
I think technology and innovation are key. And I'm quite optimistic that they will help us find solutions. And what you mentioned, desalination is already a reality. Many of those rich Gulf city-states that we are all familiar with, they have massive desalination plants, and they use the desalinated water for agriculture, for greening, and also for drinking. And the problem is that the desalination technology is extremely energy intensive. So yeah, sure, you can get water from the sea, but you have to expend an awful lot of energy. So obviously, if you can get renewable energy as powering this desalination, then that is a solution, but it's also costly. And you still have the problem, what do you do with the people who are more inland, where very often the problems are greatest? So, but however, desalination is an important technology. I think the more significant technologies are ones which are going to help us to use less water in the daily processes of life, whether it's cooking in your home, or where you might be able to cook more efficiently with less water. In fact, recipes for that already exist. Or certainly as Israel and Turkey and many countries have innovated, using much less water for growing crops and recycling that water, and other technologies for cleaning water, and basically having two sorts of water, sort of brown water or brackish water that'll do for most of your consumption needs. You don't need to have, to chlorinate and purify all the water, and then most of it is then used just to run down the drain, which is extremely wasteful way in which we currently do it. So all those things people are experimenting with, all those things are possible, and they're all part of the solution. But in the end, technology is helpful, but it cannot change human behavior all by itself.
That's true.
Technology does influence human behavior. We only have to look at our smartphones to realize how much our behavior has been shaped by our smartphone. So similarly, technology will shape our behavior as it does in everyday life, but social behavior and a personal sense of responsibility and solidarity when it comes to looking upon water as a common resource is something that will require a lot of social mobilization and public kind of activation than has happened so far.
That's true. Yeah. Public awareness, the self-responsibility is always the key solution. But would you add something else? It was a really great pleasure to listen to you, and I would like to continue, but I don't want to exit the time.
Oh.
You add something else, for our topic?
Well, I think, thank you for inviting me, and happy we're having this particular discussion. I think for our listeners, it's a question of everyone thinking about their personal responsibility. So in the same way that we were told about energy, what can we do in terms of our own personal water consumption? So that's one thing. And secondly, I think we all need to become activists, because in the end, governments, they change policies or set policy frameworks only if there is a demand. So if there isn't a public demand, then business as usual will continue. So people need to be conscious of themselves personally, but at the same time, they also need to take responsibility for helping to shape public policy through their relationships with those who govern us in whatever regime of governance a society exists. And none of us can afford to be passive any longer on this business and other related affairs.
Sure. Thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you, and it was really an awareness, and it is clear the life without water is impossible. Thank you again, Dr. Mukesh Kapila, and hope to see you again, and maybe hope to host you in Paris future.
I look forward to that. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Bye-bye.